Hello, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, this early evening. Beautiful day here in Chicago. I know you folks are all spread out all over the place. We had a couple technical difficulties, so sorry for being a couple minutes late here. But I'm excited to be able to do one of these Ask Me Anythings. We haven't done one for a little while, so I thought I would open up and see what you guys were interested in knowing about. And so I am just going to jump right in. Please, in the chat, put your questions. A few of you have given us some questions to start with, so that's where I am going to start. And I have Stan in Vegas asking, what are some Mexican foods that America should become more familiar with? So we're getting way better. I will say if I say mole, 30 some years ago when we opened Frontera and I put mole on the menu and absolutely wanted to have it there, it was the least selling dish on the menu because people didn't know about it or they thought they were afraid of it. But I will say that we have really come a long way. If I say moles, people go, "What kind of mole now?" Not thinking that there's just one mole in Mexico because there are dozens of them. And then pipianes are the simpler versions of mole, so we should definitely know about those things. I said ceviche when we first opened Frontera, and people said, "Oh, raw fish." This was before everybody became enamored with sushi. And people were a little tentative about eating that raw fish dish. Now we don't have the requests just for ceviches, but we've gone to aguachiles. And aguachiles are all made with raw fish that's just doused with a really flavorful and usually very spicy broth, lime broth, that is done right at service. So you get sort of the best of both worlds. You get that flavor of the raw and texture of the raw fish, but with all of that bracing acidity that you associate with a great ceviche. Now, if we're talking about regional specialties, that would be the next level down. And that's where I wish people in the United States would become more familiar with things. And as they usually say, in Mexico, all of the intense culture is in the southern part of Mexico. Only like in the top third of Mexico, it's very deserty up there, and only 10% of the population lives up there. But when you move Mexico City and south, a little north of Mexico City and south, what the anthropologists would call Mesoamerica, that's where you get all of this incredible regional food that actually is a continuation of what was there pre-conquest before the colonial period. And in that area, you will find all kinds of great things, say over in Michoacan. You really find regional cuisine in Oaxaca, although it's probably the best known of the regional cuisines now, all those different kinds of moles and the memelas and the big empanadas that they made with the corn tortilla dough. There's just so much to do there. The Yucatan Peninsula is like another cuisine entirely, and I really wish people in the United States would know more about that one. That's where you have the cochinita pibil, the suckling pig that is done with the marinade of achiote and wrapped in banana leaves and cooked in a pit in the ground in the classic way. But then you've got the salbutes and papadzules, two different kinds of creations that are made with the corn tortilla dough. There's the escabeches that come from there. Those are the kinds of things that is the next level. And I'm excited to see the United States become much more familiar with that. Yvonne Anthony Lopez asks, how would you make a flavorful vegetarian pozole? It's not really all that hard, but you have to have a really good vegetarian broth to do it. So you would want to cook your pozole in a really rich vegetarian broth. Now, that vegetarian broth has to carry umami. And if umami is something that's new to you, it's that what we call that flavor of deliciousness or savoriness that always comes from a couple of different sources. The meat, of course, but aged cheese. So you're thinking always about Parmesan as adding umami to something. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it comes from two vegetables. I'm going to say the mushrooms, especially not so much your button mushrooms, but things like shiitake mushrooms, and then also from tomato, but it has to be really ripe tomato. So if you make a vegetarian broth that is heavy in mushrooms primarily with a little bit of tomato in there, that would make a really good base. Now, I would go, if I'm making a vegetarian pozole, I would go red pozole or green pozole, not white, because white would give you the least amount of umami. So if you make a red pozole, which is my favorite anyway, whether it's a meat version or a vegetarian version, I would make that broth with the shiitakes and a little bit of tomato, but also with toasted guajillo chile, a toasted, soaked, blended, pureed, strained, and then cooked down. And that will give you a very rich, you could make a vegetarian pozole and put some mushrooms in it again to serve it in place of any kind of meat that would be in there. And you would just absolutely love it. On the flip side, green pozole is just a no-brainer because it's just like a green pipián that's got pozole corn in it and made brothier. So that stuff is super delicious. Just make it like regular and green pozole using vegetarian broth, and you're going to have something that's really spectacular. Don't shy away from vegetarian pozole. It's really good. Jeremy Gardner asked, how can we modify a traditional bolillo and telera recipe to be more like your restaurant's torta bread? So I never really liked any of the commercial stuff that I found in Mexico because it was all just made to be cheap and really made fast. And I just never understood it until one day I was in Uruapan, Michoacan, and I was visiting this market, and a guy had a basket of bolillos that he had made, and it was made in an old style, meaning that he was doing everything by hand and then baking his bolillos in a wood burning oven. And I tasted it and I thought they were that was perhaps the best piece of bread I've ever eaten in my life. And I started talking to him and I said, so tell me how you make your bolillos. What's the process and all that? And he said, oh, I'm so glad you like them. And this is what I do. And I said, that's made like the best French bread that I've ever heard about. And so I came back and I said, I came back to the States and said, you know, we could do something going back to the old ways and creating a bolillo that's made in that old style that will rival any kind of sandwich you could find in the United States. And that was what started our going down the path of what's now Shoko, where we really specialize in tortas. Now, on the telera side, I hadn't ever had a telera that I thought was anything but Wonder Bread like. And then a friend took me to this baker that was south of Puebla, the city of Puebla. And we had a class with him. And he was making teleras and showing us how to do that. And his started with, what the bakers would call the levain or the pouliche. And it's that sort of sourdough starter. And he was using that from batch to batch. And I was like, oh my God, I finally tasted a telera that I think is really spectacular. So we use both bolillos for tortas and teleras for tortas, two different kinds of things and done in different ways. Torta a la plancha, one's done on the plancha or typically done with teleras, and then a lot of the other ones will be done in bolillos. But thank you for that question because it's very exciting to me to be able to talk about the beginning of how we got to what we do at Shoko and our other places that do tortas. So Eric.Ulery asks, have you read any good books lately? You can include cookbooks. Okay. So let me think about what they are. Okay. So I'm going to say, I'm very eclectic in my cookbooks. I'm only going to talk about cookbooks because that's really what I read a lot. And I will say that I'm super, into baking and stuff. And I will say that Zoe Bakes Cakes is a spectacular book. And if you don't follow her on Instagram, go to Zoe Bakes Cakes, and she does some really great stuff now. On the Magnolia Network, she just started a cooking show doing baking. I've been following Zoe for a long time, and I think she does a really nice job. Gabriel Kreuter from the restaurant Gabriel Kreuter in New York is from Alsace, and his book that came out during the pandemic is spectacular. Now, most of the stuff is not something that you would want to try at home because you got to have a sous chef and you got to work for days and days. And you might want to tackle one of the recipes from time to time if you're going to do something really special. But the first third of the book is traditional Alsatian recipes, and they are really good. And you have to make the onion tart from there. It's just really incredibly spectacular. Let's see. I'm sure all of you love Ottolenghi books. I just got Ottolenghi Simple, and I have been going through that a little bit. I like his work a lot because I think lots of us like those Middle Eastern flavors. He's not doing traditional Middle Eastern food in any way, shape, or form. I mean, in his book Jerusalem, he does, but he is really doing some new stuff. That book that he did, that was the Ottolenghi, the Sweets book, from his restaurant Nopi, I believe. I haven't been to that restaurant, so I don't know. But anyway, that's got some really interesting sweets recipes that are very different than what you would get in most baking books that you would find in the U.S. or in most of Europe. It's just got a different take on things, so I like that kind of thing. Let me think. I will say that I'm looking down here because my computer's on a stack of cookbooks, as it would be typical in my house. And so I'm looking down here. Hello, my name is Ice Cream. If you're an ice cream fan and you like to make ice cream, it's the best ice cream book you could ever get. I could literally talk. That's by Dana Cree, who has a ice cream place here in Chicago. And but that book she did before she opened the shop here, and it is so good. But it's written from a restaurant perspective, meaning that this is the way chefs think about things like ice cream. And she's got the 4 basic styles of ice cream, and then how to make all these wonderful flavors with that base. Next question is from Ozturk Tugrul. Sorry if I butchered that. Where I live, it is very difficult to get fresh tomatillos. Can you talk a bit about canned tomatillos and when they can or cannot be used as a substitute for the fresh ones? Okay, that's very interesting to me. So my guess is you might live outside the United States, because now in the States, it's very easy to find tomatillos everywhere. But when I travel far away, even to Europe, and I'm asked to do a cooking demonstration or something like that, or be on a show, I have to make Mexican food that reminds me a lot of Tex-Mex food because it doesn't use any tomatillos. And tomatillos are really at the very heart. To me, tomatillos are the most essential ingredient in creating true Mexican flavor. So if you're one of those cooks that has shied away from recipes that call for tomatillos because you just don't know them well enough, just know that as you get more acquainted with tomatillos, your cooking will become better and better and more traditional in its flavor. So don't shy away from tomatillos, but um, as the person that just asked this question has experienced, there aren't tomatillos where he or she lives, and so you may be relegated to the canned ones. When I wrote Authentic Mexican, which came out in 1987, now 36 years ago, we didn't have ready availability of tomatillos, and so I had to test every recipe with canned tomatillos. There is usually brine in those tomatillos. So they tend to be more acidic in the recipes. So I'm going to say to you this one thing that I learned when I was working on a project for somebody else. They wanted to use canned tomatillos for things. So I tried all these different ways to lessen the brine part of it and add a little element that I thought reminded me of the roasted tomatillos that I love so much in the southern part of Mexico. Drain the canned tomatillos, put them onto a rimmed baking sheet and put them under a broiler and just let them concentrate. They're watery, so let them concentrate in and become less watery, and they will begin to brown on the top, and that will add or bring out a sweetness that is not there in the regular tomatillos in a can. So try that little trick and see if it helps you. Okay, I'm going on to batch two of my. I've got Jacob here who's sending me to my phone. That's why I keep looking at my phone. Sending me questions to my phone. Chef F Boy says, "Hey Rick, I'm a huge fan of your work. Thank you very much. My question is, what is your guilty pleasure fast food restaurant?" You can't ask me that question because I always get really embarrassed. I don't eat fast food, so I have absolutely nothing to say. In my younger years, I used to like Popeyes, but honest to God, I haven't eaten it in 25, 30 years. I don't know, something like that. So I don't really eat the fast food chain kind of fast food. Most of the time, people just ask me what's my guilty pleasure, and it's always donuts because I love donuts, but not yeast donuts, cake donuts. I am very particular in that, and I can easily walk past a donut that I don't think is going to be worth the calories. But man, if I find one that is good, fresh, well flavored, well made, even if it's vegan, and I have to say that because my current favorite donut in Chicago is I got to ask for the name of the place now. Oh gosh, it's not coming to my mind, but it's a vegan donut place in Lincoln Park here, and it is so good. But they're super carefully made donuts, and they have wonderful flavors that are just like just unbelievably imaginative, and it's like every donut is just a special little cake just for you. So I like that place. Somebody's going to tell me the name of it here in a minute. It's Beacon. Yes, Beacon Donuts. Okay, that's why I have Jacob here to help me out with things when I can't remember them. Octopede says, I'm curious if you ever dabbled in Indian cuisine, given how Mexican and Indian culinary cultures have such interesting commonalities, often using similar ingredients and techniques to arrive at very different results. Um, Yes. It's I think it's really hard for me. The way that you use spices in Indian food is so different than the way you use spices in Mexican food. That that conglomeration of spices, which so defines Indian food, is completely non-existent in in Mexican food. In fact, we in the United States tend to think that there's like lots of cumin used in Mexico, but there's not. Right around the border area, you'll find more of that kind of thing. But when you get down to Oaxaca, which is one of the most condimented cuisines I know, there's very little use of spices. And when they use spices, they use very little of those spices. You will find more spicing going on in the Yucatan, where they have the what they call recados. They are seasoning pastes. The most famous one is based on achiote that has a whole host of dried spices blended into it with garlic and vinegar and salt. And then that seasoning paste goes into a lot of different things. But again, it's very different. So when I started dabbling around with Indian food, I found it really hard to look at these spices, and I'm carefully measuring, trying to learn and follow somebody else's recipe that I really trust. And I came up at the same time as Julie Sani. And so I have all the Julie Sani books, and we had the same editor for our books, and everything was super carefully tested. So I've used a lot of her stuff, but I also do recipes from other people, but I made a huge batch of butter chicken. I know, don't laugh at me, okay? It it's just such a comforting flavor, and I know that it's a very Americanized approach to things. But anyway, I made a huge batch, and so then I just froze all the sauce in little containers in the freezer, and I would get it out, once every 2 or 3 weeks, and I would make a dinner with it, and I just found it like one of the most comforting and most beautiful things that I've ever had. So I will say that my knowledge of Indian food is fairly um, at the beginner's level, but I love playing around with it, and just learning how to work with those spices that way has opened a completely new door to me. So I am thankful for that. This is Jules asks, "What is your favorite dish that isn't Mexican style?" Well, I'm a terrible one to ask that, because I'll probably tell you that it's going to be the next thing I eat, because I get obsessed with one thing and then I make it over and over and over again. So if you want to know I've spent a bunch of time in Thailand. My cousins lived in Thailand, in northern Thailand, in Chiang Mai, for a long time, and a really, really close friend of ours was raised in Thailand. She's ethnically Chinese, but she was raised in Bangkok. And so when our daughter was younger, we started going to Thailand with our really close friend, and to visit my relatives. And I just fell in love with Thailand, and I fell in love with Thai food. And so I'm always working on um, trying to master more things. So I wasn't happy with with this pad thai recipe that had been given to me there, and I'd even published the recipe for it and stuff, but I wasn't quite happy with it. So for the last 6 or 8 weeks, I've been making pad thai every weekend, playing around with it. And so that's what I'm obsessed with right now. But if you ask me that in a couple of weeks, I'll be on to something new, because I think this week I'm going to make my final, for me, perfect pad thai. But I love to cook all kinds of things. So I already talked about that onion tart from Gabriel Kreuter. Ronan Dosho says, "I've enjoyed several long stays in southern Mexico, a great place to be. I've found one of my all-time favorite comfort foods there in a mercado. I've never seen it in the States. It's called masita. So you were probably in the northern part of the state of Oaxaca. And as the result of barbacoa drippings during this process, yes, I'm sure you're familiar with it. So could you, or have you come up with a reasonable recipe for that beautiful food?" No, because you have to be making the barbacoa. So if you could just kind of imagine this, it's a little bit like what I would call masa grits, that goes underneath the barbacoa and cooks underneath the barbacoa. And so the barbacoa in that area is typically goat, though some people do it with lamb. And you've got this red chili marinated meat that is on a rack above this masita. They call it masita. And then during the cooking, the meat juices sort of drip down on that. And you're exactly right. It is the ultimate comfort food. Absolutely spectacular. But see, I like anything that's sort of grits like, polenta like, anything that is even oatmeal like. I find that texture. I don't know whether it's just that I ate a lot of that kind of stuff growing up, but I find it like a real comforting thing. But you can't, now you've given me the challenge. So now I'm going to have to think about going back and making a smaller version of that. Maybe say that would serve 8 people, because I think you would have to have that much of it. So now you've challenged me, and I'm very excited to go back to it and start thinking about masita. I think we had it last time in Huahuapan de Leon, I think up in the northwest corner of Oaxaca. Okay, so stay tuned for masita, and maybe I'll come up with a great recipe for that, for in a smaller batch. Paul Garcia the third says, "Watching you win Top Chef Masters was incredible. Besides, it was hard, but I was, believe me, looking back on it now, it was every little bit of it. Besides everything that you have given back to local farmers and being a dad and now a grandpa, how does that rank on your list of achievements? Let's talk about that. Um, it doesn't hold a candle to all the stuff that I feel it was wonderful to do it, and I'm very thankful that I did it. It was kind of a weird thing. I was the one that won Top Chef Masters season 1, and they had decided to switch up things from regular Top Chef, and so they brought us first in pods of 4, and everybody said yes to it. And these very well known chefs, because you figure that if you lose from a pod of 4 and only one is going to go on from that, you haven't really lost very much. And it was fun to be there and to be celebrated as a chef in Chicago or the United States that's known and that's doing good work. So I loved being invited for that, and then I won my pod, and I was like, oh no, what's going to happen? I've got to go on to the regular competition. It was super hard. What you see on Top Chef is exactly what it is. It's a legitimate thing. You always wonder about some of the other competitions, how much the people competing know or how much they're given slack for different things. But Top Chef is a real competition. And to make it all the way to the final 3, and then it was one guy that did Italian food, one guy that did French food, and I did Mexican food. And to tell our life story in I think it was 4 dishes that we had to do was something that I just absolutely love to do. Because for me, all of the dishes that we do in our restaurant all have stories behind them, and we want to tell you those stories. And especially if you come to Topolobampo, you're going to get, like right now, all the chefs from Topolo and I took this amazing trip to Chiapas, and we're doing this incredible story of our exploration of Chiapas, from the high-end restaurant there, that really incredible one that's called Sol y Tierra. That one, Cielo, excuse me, I said the wrong name. Tierra y Cielo, that one, but all the market foods and going into the coffee plantations and the cacao plantations and all of that, and eating food with all those people. So that's the story we're telling in that, and that's what I got to do in Top Chef Masters at the end. So I felt very lucky to be able to do that and to share that with people. When I look back on that, it makes me happy, and I'm really proud that I did it and that I got all the way to the very end of that. But the ongoing projects that we do, the Farmer Foundation, our new impact culinary training for young adults on the west side of Chicago, where there's very little opportunity, and we're seeing these diamonds in the rough just blossom and get jobs in the best restaurants in Chicago. That's what that's the stuff that gets me out of bed every day. Our family really big into the arts, and we have started a family foundation that supports the storefront theaters in Chicago, and to be able to have an ongoing relationship with these young artists that are doing amazing things too and are so passionate about what they do. That's the stuff that I really am most proud of, and to see my daughter really blossom, and now we've got the next generation coming along. That's the stuff that really I love doing. And I'll tell you, I get to cook for my family on Monday nights. That's a night off, and we have these family dinners every week, and to me, that's what I look forward to. I plan that all week long. I love being able to do that. Let's see here. Next question is, let's see here. We're going on to batch 3 here. Pat Mustard asks, I have a daughter with celiac. Do you have any recipes specifically for people with celiac disease? Almost everything in Mexico is good for people that have celiac because they don't use much wheat flour at all. So, and I believe that's what you're focusing on the most. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a lot of celiacs that come to our restaurant specifically because we serve corn tortillas, handmade corn tortillas that come straight from the griddle to your table, and that gives us the opportunity. And then we don't use hardly any. The moles are the trickier things because a lot of the moles will be thickened with both tortilla and bread. But of course, if you're making the moles, you can just substitute more tortillas for the bread that would go in there, and you get voluptuous texture out of those things thickening. But remember, they're mostly thickened with the vegetable matter that's there, the dried chilies that have been reconstituted, the tomatillos, the tomatoes, those kinds of things. So I would say that Mexican food is incredibly great for people with celiac disease. Monticello or Monticello Avenue ask, what is the cheapest underrated cut of beef? I would probably say that thing that comes from the chuck that is oftentimes, I mean, it goes by a whole lot of different names, but it's that kind of eye of the chuck cut that is very flavorful, and you can actually grill it. It's going to be a little chewier because it's from the chuck, a very used muscle in the cow. So I would say that is one of my favorite. I mean, if you're talking about the most flavorful thing, I'm going to go to skirt steak and ribeyes. I know it sounds like a broken record because everybody talks about it. Those are such beefy flavored cuts. If you want to get a lot of bang for your buck, grill a flank steak. It's not as beefy flavored, but it's really easy to work with, and you can cross cut like on a diagonal or a bias cut across its grain, and it becomes much more tender if you do that. Cook it to about medium rare is what I think is the best. It'll go all the way to medium, but after that it gets tough. But I like that one. But sometimes you will find chuck steaks in the grocery store. Yeah, they'll be a little bit chewy, but that sort of eye of the chuck is one of the best and beefiest flavors, and one of the most tender muscles that is in that whole chuck area of the cow. Okay, Corey Buxar, I think, pardon me if I've mispronounced that, asks, are there other Latin cultures that you have explored and their culinary splendor? He's asking because he's Colombian. I know that there's lots of great stuff in Colombia, in Venezuela, but the only one that I've really explored a lot is Peruvian food, and it's a very complex cuisine, and I've had the opportunity several times to go to Peru. I love the dining scene in Lima, and there are lots of people that are doing everything from Amazonian cuisine, which is a thing into itself, all the way to the really sophisticated cooking of the coastal area, because they have seafood that is second to none. So the cevicherias in Lima are pardon me, are just amazing. So just that's where I've really explored the South American food. I will say I've been to a few of the Caribbean islands, but not really enough to explore very much. Say I've explored very much at all. I've eaten a bunch of beef in Argentina, but I haven't really gone past that part of it. Next question is from Peter Eschenberg. I've spent time in Oaxaca, noted they eat quite a few insects. Have you ever thought of including on your menu in the US? So yeah, and we do, and we have them from time to time. So the main ones that you probably came across in Oaxaca were the grasshoppers, of course. And I will say these are grasshoppers that have been toasted, fried basically until they're crispy, and then they salt them. And those are really, I know a lot of people have trouble getting over just the fact that they're eating an insect. But once you get over that part of it, then you really just notice that they have a mild flavor and a little kind of crunch salty crunch that a lot of people kind of make a little taco with the toasted grasshoppers and guacamole. But that's not the only thing to think about. Um, there are a number of other insects. There, the ones that I absolutely love the most, the flavor that I love the most are the escamoles. Those are the ant eggs, and those mostly come from north of Mexico City. And if you've ever had sweetbreads, they tend to love sweetbreads in French restaurants. But so if you've ever tasted the sweetbreads there, the ant eggs are quite a bit smaller, but they have a similar kind of flavor to the sweetbreads. Absolutely delicious there. And then there are some other ones, humiles, and well, the list just goes on and on. And now they're becoming more available in the United States. But I will say that we tend to use in our restaurants more the crispy little grasshoppers and as a say topping on a guacamole or something like that. And we can do it in that Oaxacan style, as you mentioned. But yeah, Mexican food, we wouldn't have called it Mexican food. We would have said pre-Columbian food before the Spaniards arrived. That was largely a vegetarian diet, which works just fine because beans and corn will go together to provide you with all the amino acids that you need for synthesizing protein. So you can have a beautiful, rich diet that is very healthy. And nixtamalized corn is very healthy for you, way healthier than just straight corn, non-nixtamalized corn. So I will say that when you add the insects to that mix, that pretty vegetarian mix, you get a really quite healthy diet. And there were a number of people from the Noma group in Copenhagen a few years ago. Probably a lot of you are familiar with them because they've been sort of at the top of the heap, and they created a book that everybody uses as the Bible on fermentation. But they out of their group also came one on eating insects. Fermentation caught on, eating insects not so much, but maybe in the future we'll see people eating more insects. Let's see here. And Alexis Leger says, "Hi, Rick. I am a vegetable farmer in Canada, and I grow my own Mexican peppers like poblanos to make more authentic salsa. Do you smoke and or dry your own peppers to make ancho or chipotle? If so, how?" The thing is that we work with so many people in Mexico that do such a beautiful job of it that we don't do much of it here. I know a lot of people are trying to do their own, but oftentimes it has seemed a bit amateurish to me. Poblanos are typically not smoked, but of course, chipotle comes from the Aztec language, which means smoked chili. It was the original smoked chili. And there are a number of varieties of in that chipotle category that are smoked, all the way to that one that's called the pasilla oaxaqueño, the Oaxacan pasilla, which is a smoked dried jalapeno. That same chili exists up in Puebla, and they call it navideño for like a Christmas chili up there. And I will say it's got a sweetness and a smokiness that I just absolutely love. That probably is my favorite of the smoked chilies. We have done some smoke drying of some of the chilies. So up until just a couple decades ago, there were no dried habaneros in the Yucatan Peninsula, the place that is the origin for that particular chili. But now people are drying it, and a lot of people are smoke drying it. So that's the one that I would say is worth trying out, is the smoke dried one. But you could actually, any of your fresh chilies that are small, you could smoke dry. And the old way of doing it, of course, was to dig a pit, get a smoldering fire down in the bottom of that pit, put a palm mat over the top, lay your fresh chilies there, let the smoke gently come up from the bottom and smoke the chili and help force dry it. And then the sun comes down from the top and helps to dry that chili as well. So that's the old-fashioned way of doing it. But most people nowadays will do it in a regular closed cabinet smoker. Okay, now we are going on to our next batch here. Somebody with no name asks, "Are you making a new cookbook?" I'm always making a new cookbook, but we have. I know you guys have noticed that we had started this thing called the Taco Manual that we're doing on YouTube. So we're producing one of those every week, so that you have the opportunity to sort of follow through. And I'm doing a lot of the classic stuff. I will say that in Mexico, trying to do tacos in your house is not something that people usually tackle because it's everywhere. And when you go to a taqueria, they specialize in one, two, three, five things. Okay. And they have perfected that, oftentimes generation to generation, but they know exactly how to do that one thing better than you could ever try to do it in your house. So, what I'm trying to do is kind of the impossible. I'm trying to take those things, those classic preparations that you would normally in Mexico go out for, and make them into a recipe you can tackle in your own kitchen, but with the result not seeming lame. That's exactly what happens most of the time. You read these recipes and then you make it. I don't know if you guys know the big book that's called Tacopedia, but Tacopedia is in English and Spanish. And if you've got one of the English versions of it, I would say be careful about those recipes because they're sketchy at best. They don't really tell you how to do it. Or if you did follow what they're saying, a lot of times you would be disappointed in the outcome. So, my goal is to give you guys recipes for traditional tacos that you're just going to love, that are going to be worth your time and satisfying as a great recipe. So that's something that's in work. We're also working on a big book. During the pandemic, I started a book that I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I started a book on Sunday morning breakfast because I always cook Sunday morning breakfast, and I got a whole book's worth of material, but it needs to get into good shape. If you guys would like to have those recipes, just put it in the chat that you would like to have them, because that's something that we could probably work into things. I'm not sure it'll ever be published as a book. It was it was one of my COVID projects, but I had time to do. I love writing, so it gave me an opportunity to do something different that because I cook every Sunday morning in my house. Ellen Bloodfield asks, how would you suggest replacing onions and garlic in Mexican recipes? Onions and garlic are so integral to Mexican recipes that when you're working with a traditional cook, they will never tell you to put onions and garlic in the recipe because they will assume that you know that that's the place you start in all basic recipes, all like savory recipes. You just start with onions and garlic. And so then as an investigator, I always have to ask, oh, and you put onions and garlic in this? And they look at me like, why are you asking that question? Of course we put onions and garlic in it. So to answer your question is really hard, because I could say, oh, just leave them out. But then people in Mexico would definitely tell you it doesn't taste like Mexican food because it doesn't start with that. It's like there's that thing that's called sofrito in a lot of cultures. And oftentimes it is onions and garlic with other things like spices and tomato, or sometimes achiote will go in there, and that makes your sofrito. And you start with that, and then you customize it to finish the recipe. In Mexico, it's pretty much, in most places, the onions and garlic part of it, and they don't use the word sofrito very often at all. But I will say that without that onions and garlic, you will find that it lacks sweetness. So we do this menu in Topolobampo where we tell stories, as I've already alluded to in this conversation. We tell stories of pre-Columbian food once a year. And it's the hardest menu that we do because we don't get to cook with onions and garlic because those were brought by the Spaniards. So once you leave that onions and garlic out, everything tends to feel like it has less body and less roundness to the flavors, I would say. So we have to figure out all kinds of other ways to get that. We talked already about making a good vegetable stock that's got umami and stuff in it. So we will tend to do that. We will tend to, we sometimes work with ramps, which are wild onion that are native to to North and Central America. And so sometimes we'll use that. But my guess is that there's an allergy involved in this question, and I'm really sorry that I don't have more complete answer. But having tried a lot to leave them out, I will say you can just leave them out. There will just be a little bit less roundness. Any dishes that have cream in it will help to when you leave the onions and garlic out, to give that mouthfeel that the onions and garlic blended into something would. Um, so it's a sensitivity. I never finished. She says her husband has sensitivity to all alliums, including chives and leeks. So yeah, it's just a little bit harder. But I would say just leave them out and try to go for things that perhaps have a cream element in there, because it'll really help to substitute for what you're missing from the onions and garlic. Christine C says, I can't make black mole from scratch. In that situation, how would you improve the jarred versions available in the market? Okay, we did this huge project where we bought every mole we could get our hands on. We didn't go all the way to Doña Maria. I've never really liked it. It's probably improved over what it used to be, but I stayed away from that. And we went into all the Mexican grocery stores, not all of them, but lots of them here in Chicago. And we found out, which are the versions that they were selling from places in Mexico. Oddly enough, most of them come from Guerrero, and most of them came from one town in Guerrero called Teloloapan. And I will say that we didn't like any of them. Okay, so that said, I'm going to say what is available that I really do like, and that is you can get on Amazon. It kind of goes in and out of stock. So if you like it, get one container of it and make it. And if you like it, then order more of it, because it'll keep for a long time. And that one is the one that comes from Oaxaca, and it's called Mayordomo. And it's all one word, Mayor, Mayordomo, Mayordomo. It's Oaxaca. Those of you that have been to Oaxaca saw it, because they have cafes all over downtown Oaxaca City. And they're really well known for their chocolate there, which is also something I recommend to all visitors to Oaxaca. Bring back the Mayordomo chocolate, the stuff that is just fresh ground. It'll change your life, okay? But they also sell the mole paste there. And I visited their factory, and I think they do a really good job with it. And yes, you can buy the Coloradito and black most of the time. Coloradito is the one you would use to make enchiladas. At least that's what they do in Oaxaca. But you can use it for chicken, or there's a great Lenten dish that is the runner beans that are braised in the Coloradito. I like that a lot. Anyway, so that and the black mole from Mayordomo are two that I can get behind. I wish I could say I could get behind a lot of these other ones, but I just think that they're out of balance. Now, remember that most people will saute onions and garlic and blend it with the mole paste. Some people would say onions, garlic, and some tomato cooked down. And then you blend that and add your mole, blend that with your mole paste, and then you simmer that for quite some time. The longer you simmer it, the better it gets. Okay. So you'll have to report back to me what you think are good moles, but our experience with what we could find here in Chicago was not particularly great. No, it wasn't good at all. Eric Yeager says it's hard to get fresh epazote even at my local carniceria. It's always wilted and browned on the edges. Do you think it's still worth using? And should I try to grow my own? The answer to both of those questions is yes, yes, yes. Okay. So the wilted stuff, you're going to throw it in a pot of beans and cook it, and you'll get a load of flavor. So don't worry about the fact that it's already wilted to a little extent. But here's what I'm going to tell you about growing your own epazote. Super easy to grow. It wants to be abused. It really doesn't want very rich soil, and it wants 100% sun. You can grow it in a pot, which is what I always recommend doing. It sort of pops up around my yard. We collect it and we put them in pots, because once it starts going to seed, you don't want to let it continue to go to seed, because the seeds will blow all over your yard and soon you will have nothing but a yard of epazote. It's it likes poor soil oftentimes, and that's why we find it growing in the cracks in the sidewalks all around our house. So I would suggest that you buy some fresh seeds. Places like Johnny's Seeds have it, but lots of places have it. But buy some fresh seeds. Keep them wrapped up in sealed as well as you can after you sow a few seeds. Put them in your freezer and store them there. But then put a few seeds in a pot. I would recommend a 10-inch to 12-inch pot. And then let it dry out completely between watering. So that means that depending on what the temperature is outside, it can go half a week to a full week without watering, but it kind of wants to be abused a little bit, and it'll do really well. The hardiest stuff that we ever get is the stuff that comes up volunteer in our yard that we put into pots, but we also buy seeds sometimes and plant some, but we always plant it in pots so that we can move it when it starts to go to seed. Okay, next one here. This is batch 5. Garlene Marfias asks, what's your take on Tex-Mex food? And my take on Tex-Mex food is I grew up eating Tex-Mex food. To me, we called it Mexican food. And it wasn't until I got to Mexico that I realized that people in Mexico don't eat the food that I grew up on at all. And they didn't even understand when I talked about my favorite cheese enchiladas growing up in Mexico City. Nobody had even heard of that. So I will say that it's now, when you go to places like San Antonio and Austin, 2 cities that I know the most in Texas. So those of you in other parts of Texas will have to correct all of what I'm going to say now. But what my experience eating Tex-Mex food in Austin and San Antonio is that a whole lot of what people in Texas would call interior Mexican food has crept into those menus. So now every time I go to Texas, and I've done a whole lot with the Culinary Institute of America campus in San Antonio, and I was just in Austin a couple times last year. So I got a chance to eat around in some places that a lot of that Mexican food there is really seeming to be very influenced by the cuisines of Mexico. So it's not so cut and dried as it was when I was a kid, and every plate came with beans and rice, and you got your combination plates of about 6 different things. That's the Tex-Mex I grew up on, but that's not the Tex-Mex of today. So it's become a much more sophisticated and more diverse cuisine than what I experienced when I was growing up. When I did my first book, I wanted to include the American Southwest as one of the regions of Mexico because, hey, it used to be part of Mexico, and it's got a distinctive cuisine. It's got several distinctive cuisines. If you want to lop them into great big categories, it's Tex-Mex, and then you get the New Mex, and then you get the Arizona desert stuff, that Sonoran desert food, and then you get the Cal-Mex, and they're all really different. And so I wanted to do that, but my editor said it's too much material, and we've got a national border in between, so I didn't get a chance to do that. But I think there's something to be said about learning more about all of those cuisines. Okay, Traveling with Elliot asks, when you return to your home in Mexico City, is there one food that you always seek out first? Oh, there is a bunch. Okay. I think it goes without saying, because I've said this on lots of different forums. I love going to Contramar. I think it's the most consistent and consistently great restaurant in Mexico City. It's an all seafood menu, and just eating the ceviche Contramar, their classic one, is always, it's not the best thing you've ever eaten in your life in a way, because you would say, oh, I've had something that's a little more interesting here or there. No, it's just super solid, just so absolutely solid and delicious. And then that grilled fish that they do, then you can get one side a la talla and the other side contramar style with the green herb mixture on it. And it's like, there can't be anything better than that. So I love that stuff. I always go back to that. I always will find a place to eat chilaquiles because I'm a chilaquiles freak. I just think chilaquiles are so comforting. Now, there's a new style of chilaquiles that I don't like at all, and I have to say that out here. It's what I call the chips and hot salsa version of chilaquiles, where you just heat the sauce up and pour it over some chips and serve it. That ain't chilaquiles to me. I don't know why this has gotten started, because I think you could just eat that with your fingers. But chilaquiles, you let the chips soften slightly in that sauce, and the sauce needs to be brothy, and then you take it out when there's still integrity in those chips, but they're softened all around the edges. That's my favorite version of chilaquiles, and to me, that is my soul food through and through. um, I could go on for hours, but I at least told you a couple of things that I love having when I go to Mexico City. Hoyumpa House. I think I said that right. Hoyumpa House. I'm sorry if I didn't. Says, "S, are you still able to do all of your yoga moves?" Ah, no. Gosh, that you're hurting me. You're hurting me. A year and a half since my accident, and I'm still in physical therapy, and I still have not gained everything in back in my shoulder. So I have been a handstand freak forever, and I love seeing the world from an upside down perspective. Now I have to do that in headstand because I can't yet support my full body weight on my right side. But I'm working at it, and man, I work really hard at it. Jacob recommended to me earlier that I do something about yoga, because I still have a daily practice of yoga, and it's discouraging to me. I can't do everything, but maybe I'll show you what I can do now. But I don't do yoga just for the physicality of it. I do it more for emotional stuff, because I think that moving your body and breathing in a regular way is a great stress reliever. And yoga, I'm not talking about I'm going to sit and stretch kind of yoga, because I don't do that kind. I do a very active form of yoga, sort of based on vinyasa style, ashtanga style. And I really love that because you get into this rhythm. And the next thing you know, I've figured out stuff at work, because I just let my mind go into this neutral zone. And that gives my mind the opportunity to figure out what I need to be doing. So, I like it from that standpoint, or if I'm stressed about something, just getting into the flow of a yoga practice is really, really good for me. Still, I love going upside down. So I'm going to say that I'm doing a lot of headstands these days, while I can't do yet my full handstand. But I'll keep you guys posted on that. Christian Melgard, and I don't know how you pronounce your first name, Christian or Christian. Hey, Rick, I'm living an hour north of Puerto Vallarta. Studied Spanish in college, huge foodie, would like to make a career out of it. What advice do you have for me? First thing that I'll say is you have to be a very physical person, okay? It's a physical job. And if you like giving dinner parties and you think I would like to work in a restaurant, throw that out the window. It ain't no dinner party. Okay. You have to like the everydayness of it, because we change our menus a lot at Frontera, yet every day there are certain things that have to be done. And you have to love that. You have to love getting your mise en place ready. You have to love, if you work the line in a restaurant, you have to love the game of working the line. It's not just about making this one dish. It's about making this one dish 40 times. And you have to love the rhythm of that and getting into it and challenging yourself to do it even better the next time, even better the next time. And so I always think of it as a game. I'm not a game player. except working the line is a game to me, and I love doing that kind of stuff. You just get so lost in it. It's like a yoga practice in a sense that you get in the flow of it, and it's really really satisfying to those of the people that love it. Um, I will say that it's it is usually, so I don't know what age bracket you're in now, but I would say that it's usually a profession for somebody that's a little bit younger to get started in. Not that I haven't known people in the middle age that have started it and absolutely loved it. If you're a physical person and you like to work standing up and just with your hands all the time, then hey, it will be the right thing for you. I know that a lot of people like to disparage working in the restaurant world, and they say that it's like, oh yeah, I'm a really well-known restaurateur that got out of the business sort of midlife, and he said, "No, I'm a reformed restaurant." I was like, "No, dude, you just weren't ready for it. You weren't right for that kind of job." To me, it's the most exciting thing, and so I will say that it's right for a whole bunch of people, but you have to be one of those people. So make sure that it is the right kind of job for you. A lot of people that come out of the French pastry school here in Chicago want to work in bakeries and not in restaurants, because bakeries have daytime hours and not nighttime hours, and so restaurants, we make our living at nighttime, and so you have to think about that. Is that going to be the right thing for you? You tend to make all your friends in the restaurant world because everybody's working on Friday and Saturday nights, and they're all available in the morning and not in the evenings. And so you tend to match up with other people like that. So make sure that that's the right thing for you and that you have the support around being in that kind of a life. We have James M asking what basic traditional Mexican dish to make that's fairly easy. There are many of them. I will say that I came up with this mole recipe that is it's really kind of like a pipián recipe. And you can make it from beginning to end in 1 hour, and it takes a blender, and it's really straightforward. Okay. That recipe, um, I don't know if I've ever posted it anyway. It's in one of my books. It's in More Mexican Every Day, the last book that I did, and I really love that recipe as a sort of beginner because it's very easy to make, yet produces a result that will absolutely astonish most people. So I always encourage people to do that. Plus, the flavor it's a red peanut mole, so there's got peanut flavor. It will sort of remind you of a very complex version of most people's sauté sauce, but way more complex. And you grill some chicken or broil some chicken, and it's just so good. So you could make that for friends and family, and it is super good. I wouldn't start off with any of the traditional moles like mole poblano or black mole, because you'll just get lost in it because they're very complex to do. But enchilada recipes, I know on our website we've got the enchilada suiza recipe. That is always a crowd pleaser. Something like pork tinga poblana is also very easy to do, and yeah, again, a great crowd pleaser. So thank you all so much for being here, for all these incredible questions. I think it's time that we draw this one to a close. We'll do this again in a few months. So if you have some questions, just hang on and I will be back with you. And I hope you enjoyed this one. Again, I want to say thank you all so much for subscribing to our YouTube channel. That means a lot to us. We're releasing MoPats, the Mexico one plate at a time. one a week from our back catalog. We're finally being able to make that available to you on YouTube. So we're excited about that. And we will go back to producing more for our kitchen sessions, which is what we were doing last year a lot. We put that on hold for a little bit to start the taco manual stuff. And we will do that for a while. And then we're going to go back to kitchen sessions and do more of those kinds of things. Be going to Mexico pretty soon, and we'll do a lot of footage from Mexico. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for subscribing and for supporting all the stuff that we do. We really, really appreciate it. Have a great night.